that were of stately size with large print. He was more careful in his dress than any other boy. He was a wide reader and read very fast indeed. How much he assimilated I could never make out. He was poor at music. We thought him a fair scholar, but nothing extraordinary. However, he startled everyone the last year at school in the classical medal examination by walking easily away from us all in the viva voce of the Greek play, the Agamemnon. I may now try and accentuate a trait or two of these photographs, so to speak, and then realize the whole portrait by adding an account given to me by Oscar himself. The joy in humorous romancing and the sweetness of temper recorded by Sir Edward Sullivan were marked traits in Oscar's character all through his life. His care in dressing, too, and his delight in stately editions, his love of literature, with a special leaning to poetry, were all qualities which distinguished him to the end. "Until the last year of my school life at Portora," he said to me once, "I had nothing like the reputation of my brother Willie. I read too many English novels, too much poetry, dreamed away too much time to master the school tasks. Knowledge came to me through pleasure, as it always comes, I imagine. I was nearly 16 when the wonder and beauty of the old Greek life began to dawn upon me. Suddenly I seemed to see the white figures throwing purple shadows on the sun-baked palaestra, bands of nude youths and maidens, you remember Gautier's words, moving against a background of deep blue as on the frieze of the Parthenon. I began to read Greek eagerly for love of it all, and the more I read, the more I was enthralled. Oh, what golden hours were for us as we sat together there while the white vests of the chorus seemed to wave up a light air, while the cotherns trod majestic down the deep iambic lines, and the rolling anapaestics curled like vapour over shrines. The headmaster was always holding my brother Willie up to me as an example, but even he admitted that in my last year at Portora I had made astounding progress. I laid the foundation there of whatever classical scholarship I possess. It occurred to me once to ask Oscar in later years whether the boarding school life of a great public school was not responsible for a good deal of sensual viciousness. "Englishmen all say so," he replied, "but it did not enter into my experience. I was very childish, Frank, a mere boy till I was over 16. Of course I was sensual and curious as boys are, and had the usual boy imaginings, but I did not indulge in them excessively. At Portora 9 out of 10 boys only thought of football or cricket or rowing. Nearly every one went in for athletics, running and jumping and so forth. No one appeared to care for sex. We were healthy young barbarians, and that was all." "Did you go in for games?" I asked. "No," Oscar replied, smiling. "I never liked to kick or be kicked." "Surely you went about with some younger boy, did you not, to whom you told your dreams and hopes, and whom you grew to care for?" The question led to an intimate personal confession, which may take its place here. "It is strange you should have mentioned it," he said. "There was one boy and," he added slowly, "one peculiar incident. It occurred in my last year at Portora. The boy was a couple of years younger than I. We were great friends. We used to take long walks together, and I talked to him interminably. I told him what I should have done had I been Alexander, or how I'd have played king in Athens had I been Alcibiades. As early as I can remember, I used to identify myself with every distinguished character I read about, but when I was 15 or 16, I noticed with some wonder that I could think of myself as Alcibiades or Sophocles more easily than as Alexander or Caesar. The life of books had begun to interest me more than real life. My friend had a wonderful gift for listening. I was so occupied with talking and telling about myself that I knew very little about him, curiously little when I come to think of it. But the last incident of my school life makes me think he was a sort of mute poet, and had much more in him than I imagined. It was just before I first heard that I had won an exhibition and was to go to Trinity. Dr. Steele had called me into his study to tell me the great news. He was very glad, he said, and insisted that it was all due to my last year's hard work. The hard work had been very interesting to me, or I would not have done much of it. The doctor wound up, I remember, by assuring me that if I went on studying as I had been studying during the last year, I might do as well as my brother Willie, and be as great an honour to the school and everybody connected with it as he had been. This made me smile, for though I liked Willie, and knew he was a fairly good scholar, I never for a moment regarded him as my equal in any intellectual field. He knew all about football and cricket, and studied the school books assiduously, whereas I read everything that pleased me, and in my own opinion always went about crowned. Here he laughed charmingly with amused deprecation of the conceit. It was only about the quality of the crown, Frank, that I was in any doubt. If I had been offered the triple tiara, it would have appeared to me only the meet reward of my extraordinary merit. When I came out from the doctor's, I hurried to my friend to tell him all the wonderful news. To my surprise, he was cold, and said a little bitterly, I thought, "You seem glad to go." "Glad to go!" I cried. "I should think I was. Fancy going to Trinity College, Dublin, from this place. Why, I shall meet men and not boys. Of course I am glad, wild with delight. The first step to Oxford and fame." "I mean," my chum went on, still in the same cold way, "you seem glad to leave me." His tone startled me. "You silly fellow," I exclaimed, "of course not. I'm always glad to be with you. But perhaps you will be coming up to Trinity too, won't you?" "I'm afraid not," he said, "but I shall come to Dublin frequently." "Then we shall meet," I remarked. "You must come and see me in my rooms. My father will give me a room to myself in our house, and you know Merrion Square is the best part of Dublin. You must come and see me." He looked up at me with yearning, sad, regretful eyes. But the future was beckoning to me, and I could not help talking about it, for the golden key of Wonderland was in my hand, and I was wild with desires and hopes. My friend was very silent, I remember, and only interrupted me to ask, "When do you go, Oscar?" "Early," I replied thoughtlessly, or rather full of my own thoughts. "Early tomorrow morning, I believe, the usual train." In the morning, just as I was starting for the station, having said good-bye to everyone, he came up to me very pale and strangely quiet. "I'm coming with you to the station, Oscar," he said. "The doctor gave me permission when I told him what friends we had been." "I'm glad," I cried, my conscience pricking me that I had not thought of asking for his company. "I'm very glad. My last hours at school will always be associated with